All right, this is 9.4 lecture video over order of operations with signed numbers. So in the last two sections, we've learned the rules for adding and subtracting signed numbers and the rules for multiplying and dividing signed numbers. Now we're ready to kind of put it all together and follow all of the rules that we've learned for fractions, for adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, whole numbers, fractions, decimals, and now our signed numbers. We're going to put them all into one problem. But before we do that, let's look at these rules. A lot of you are familiar with the rules being said as please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. So P is parentheses, E is exponents and roots or radicals. M and D for multiply and divide. I want you to see that multiply and divide are equal to each other. There's not one that's better or trumps the other. We work all multiply and divide or divide and multiply from left to right, however they show up in the problem. So if the very first thing we see when we're working this step or this stage of the problem, and on the far left side we get to a division problem before we see any multiplication, it's okay because they are equals. We just take care of all of them moving left to right through the problem. Same thing for add and subtract. That's the A and the S, the last two rules here. They are actually one rule. You take care of all of the add and subtract going left to right through the problem. We don't take care of all the adds and then all the subtracts. It doesn't work like that. So if you need a second longer to write these down, pause the video, but we're going to move on. So here's our first problem. There are no parentheses in this problem. So that P for please excuse or PEMDAS, it isn't even there. So we move on, and I guess I could make myself a little note over here. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, or PEMDAS, right? So our parentheses are not there, so we move on to exponents. And I actually don't see any exponents in the problem either, so now we're going to multiply and divide from left to right through the problem. So I don't see any multiplication, but I did move from left to right and I found this division problem. Okay, so I'm going to divide 10 divided by 2, and I get what? 5. So I'm going to bring down everything. I guess I can move all this mess and kind of write it the way I usually write it. When I find what I want to divide or to work, I put it in these little V things. So I know that everything in there is what I'm using. And notice that I grouped together that minus sign that goes between the 4 and the 10. If there's a sign in front of it, it belongs with that number. So I actually have a negative 10 divided by 2. So 10 divided by 2 is 5. And I see now that I have a negative 10 and a positive 2. Signs are different. When you multiply and divide, the answer is always negative. So I brought down a negative 5 out of this whole piece here. The things I haven't used, I'm going to go ahead and bring down. Okay, and I'm going to mark out the multiply and divide because there is no multiply and I've taken care of the division. Now I'm at that add subtract. So I need to work my way from left to right, taking care of all of the add and subtract. So my first one I get to is this guy. And I see it's a subtraction sign. So I'm going to change the sign. And so now I have the problem that I need to rewrite plus a negative 5. And so I know that the signs are different. So I'm going to subtract. So 5 minus 4 is 1. And the signs are different. So I'm going to take the sign of the bigger number. And the bigger number was 5, so it's going to be a negative 1. And here I am bringing down things that I have not used. Okay, so we are still in that add subtract phase, and now we're at this guy. And so a negative 1 plus 7, it's an addition problem, which is what we want, so there's no changing of any signs. But what I do have is a positive 7 and a negative 1, which means the signs are different, so I'm going to subtract, and I'm going to take the sign of the bigger number, and the bigger number was positive, so my answer for this one, my final answer, is a positive 6. Feel free at any point, if you want to go back and listen to these and watch these again, just pause the video or even try to work them on your own before I give you the explanation and work them through with you. So right now, as I gave you this new problem, pause the video, try to work it on your own if you feel pretty confident about these, and then let me explain it to you after you've worked this. All right, so here we go. We're going to go ahead and write our rules again. Parentheses, exponents, multiply, divide, add, subtract. My letters are getting messy. We do have parentheses, right? We have this set here. And so I see subtraction problems. So I'm going to change it to add and change the sign of the number that follows. And so I need to rewrite this to help me really see what I have. So I'm going to subtract because the signs are different. So I have 7 minus 5 gives me 2. And I'm going to take the sign of the bigger number, which was 7. So all of this became a positive 2. Notice up here at the very top that there is no symbol between the 8 and this parenthesis right here, which means the 8 is being multiplied times whatever the answer is of that inside. So I'm actually going to leave this to be a parenthesis around the 2 to show that these two are going to be multiplied when we get to that multiplication step. Okay? I'm also going to bring down my minus 9. All right, so here's what I have. I have negative 8 times 2 minus 9. So we're at no more parentheses. There are no exponents, so now we're at the multiplication stage. So I said already that I knew that these were multiplied together because they are touching, meaning there is no symbol between the 8 and those parentheses. The plus that I wrote there was a positive 2 that came out of this piece, but I realized that, you know, like your age, if you're 22, you don't tell people I'm positive 22, right? They just know it's positive, it's understood. So same thing with this 2. I don't need to write a plus 22 if I don't need a symbol to separate the negative 8 and the 2. I just have those parentheses separating it, so I don't need the plus sign. So here I am. I have multiplication. 8 times 2 gives me 16. I have a negative and a positive. Signs are different. The answer is always negative when I multiply and divide. So I have the 16, the negative 16, and I'm going to bring down what I haven't used, which is my minus 9. So this is a subtraction problem. We're done with multiply and divide. Now we're at that add subtract. There really is no add, but if you follow the rules for subtraction, it changes subtract to add and changes the sign of the guy that follows. So my problem is negative 16 plus a negative 9. The signs are the same, so I will add and keep the sign. Negative 16 and 9 give me 25, and keep the sign is negative, so my final answer is negative 25. All right, go back and we're going to start throwing some exponents in. Before I do that, I want to make sure that we understand how to work exponents. So this 2 up here, this squared, is telling us that we have 2 of everything that's inside the parentheses. And the negative is with the 3, so that means that I have a negative 3 times a negative 3. Anything that you have a power raised to, it means multiplication. Okay? And if the negative was on the outside of this, it would not go with this. So it would be 3 times 3, which is 9, and then the negative would come for the final answer. But in this case, the negative is inside, so I have 2 negative 3s. So negative 3 times negative 3 is 9. 2 negatives make up positive, right? When I multiply, if the signs are the same, it's always positive. So I have a positive 9, and this guy would have been a negative 9. So notice the difference between those two problems. Let's try one more to make sure we understand. Is this a negative 4, or is this 4s with the negative that comes at the end? Well, it's a negative 4 because it's inside the parentheses. Well, how many do I have? I have 3 of them. So I have negative 4 times negative 4 times negative 4. Well, I start from left to right, just like we do in our problems. And signs are the same. The answer is positive. 4 times 4 is 16. I bring down what I haven't used. Okay, signs are different. The answer is negative. And 16 times 4 gives me a negative 64. Final answer. All right, let's try some more challenging ones. We got a lot happening here, right? First of all, I'm going to talk through what I see. I see an addition problem here. Okay, I see that there is no symbol between the 2 and those parentheses, so 2 is going to get multiplied times whatever the answer is that comes out of this parenthesis. Okay, I also see that there are no symbols between these parentheses, meaning the answer that comes from here and the answer that comes from here will also be multiplied together. Okay, I see that there is a division sign here. Oops, I erased one of my dots, sorry. And that division sign there tells me that it's going to go, that parenthesis division problem will happen first before before this 2 right here, goodness, I can't write, before the 2 gets multiplied, because we're going to take care of everything inside the parentheses first, and then we'll move on to anything that's outside the parentheses, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and get started with this problem. See if I can not erase things. Step 1 is to work parentheses from left to right. So inside parentheses, I have this, from left to right, right? That's the first one I get to. So I know I'm going to change this to addition and change the sign of the number that follows, which gives me 6 plus a negative 8. The signs are different. I will subtract and take the sign of the bigger number, and so that's where my negative 2 comes from. Okay, I'm going to leave it in parentheses because remember this 2 up here is going to get multiplied times that. I'm going to bring down everything I haven't used yet. I didn't mean to put those in red. I was going to put them in black so you could see that they're still what they were. I'm going to bring down the other parentheses, right? I'm not there yet. I do one at a time. And I'm hanging on to the answers that I bring down so I don't lose anything. The next thing I do is the other set of parentheses on the left side or on the right side as I move from left to right in the problem. And so here I am. And I have 15 divided by 3, which is 5. Both signs are the same. They're both positive. So since the signs are the same, the answer is always positive. And I'm going to bring down the parentheses because remember there was no symbol between those two parentheses, which means the -2 and the 5 are now multiplication problems. I'm going to bring down that 2 and the 3 that I have not used. All right, so let me go back. I haven't written the rules here. So here's my parentheses, exponents, multiply, divide, add, subtract. We've now completed our parentheses. Now we're on to exponents, and I don't see any in this problem. Okay, so we're going to mark those out. Now we're on to multiply and divide from left to right. So as I start from the problem left, I move over and I find this multiplication problem first. So we're going to multiply 2 times a -2. Well, 2 times 2 is 4. Signs are different. The answer is always negative. Okay. I'm going to bring down the 3 that I haven't used. And I want to show you specifically that this is grouped together. That was a +2 times a -2. So the sign that comes down is actually the negative, which is the answer from the problem that we just did, that multiplication. So here's my 3, but I don't bring that in that plus sign, okay? And then here is that 5 in parentheses that I haven't used yet. So we're still multiplying because I see another multiplication problem, and that is here. And so a -4 times 5, 4 times 5 is 20. Signs are different, the answer is always negative, and so that's where that negative comes from. I have not used my 3 yet, so it comes down. And so now I have a subtraction sign problem, and I need to change it to addition and change the sign of the number that follows. So the problem I have is 3 plus a -20. Signs are different. I'm going to subtract and take the sign of the bigger number. Well, 20 was bigger, right? So I have a -17 final answer. Okay. We're going to write our rules. Parentheses, exponents, multiply, divide, add, subtract. And this is exponents and roots, meaning like square roots if we ever have any. Okay. And first thing that I need to do here is parentheses. I see -3 inside the parentheses. Can I do anything with just a -3? No, there's not a 2 minus a 3 for me to take care of inside the parentheses. It's just a number, and these are acting as just barriers or boundaries. Okay, so there's not really anything I need to do inside those parentheses. And so I'm going to mark out my parentheses and move on to exponents. And I see 2 of them. So here I'm going to have 4 times 4, which gives me 16. I'm going to bring down everything else that I haven't used yet. And I do realize I have another exponent. I just like to do them one at a time so I can keep track of what I still have left over my problem. So for this one, we're back at showing that I have a negative with it. So I have a -3 times a -3, which gives me a +9. I'm going to leave it in parentheses because what I'm bringing down here that I haven't used is a negative and a positive would be side by side, and I can't have that, so I'm going to separate them by parentheses, okay? So now I just have one problem, and that's a subtraction problem, and that's saying that I have a 16 minus a +9. You know, we could write a +9 as just 9, right? So what I really have is 16 minus 9. This is a subtraction problem that needs to be changed to addition and change the sign of the number that follows. So I have 16 plus a -9. Okay, signs are different, so I will subtract 16 minus 9. And what do I get when I subtract 16 minus 9? 7. And I take the sign of the bigger number. The bigger number was 16, so this is a +7 final answer for this problem. Right, write our rules again. Parentheses, exponents, multiply, divide, add, subtract. I realize this is a lot, but it's just one of those things where repetition is how you perfect your skills for these. If you don't work a lot of problems, you're not ever going to get any better at these, okay? All right, so parentheses. this guy here is actually the only one that has anything to do, right? This guy just has a -5 hanging out by himself, okay? Those parentheses on that one is telling you that the negative belongs with a 5 when you square it. So in a little bit, we're going to make sure that we take -5 times -5 to take care of that one, okay? But that's all those parentheses are doing for us there. What we're doing in the parentheses over here is actually a subtraction problem. And remember, I need to change it to addition and change the sign of the guy that follows. And so this is the problem I now have. And notice that it is still in those parentheses. It's still squared, okay? So we got to bring down the square. We can't forget about it. So the signs are different. I subtract and take the sign of the bigger number. And so I end up with a -2 with that squared that's being brought down that I haven't used yet. So notice this guy here is being brought down right there. I'm going to bring down this guy and this whole piece. And so I have -5 in parentheses squared minus, right? Because that minus sign was in the original problem. And then I'm going to bring down the parentheses 3. I want to go back up to the original problem and I want to point out that there is no sign. It's kind of hard to see because I wrote all of everything. There's no sign right here between these two parentheses, right? There's a little space because of the squared, but there's no add or subtract sign, which means that it's a multiplication problem between these two guys when I bring it down, okay? All right, so we're done with parentheses. We're now moving on to exponents, and my exponents are my -5 times -5 because I'm working from left to right. So -5 and -5, signs are the same, the answer is positive, and 5 times 5 is 25. So I have a positive 25. I bring down the subtract sign, I bring down my parentheses with the -2, and I bring down that -3 parentheses. My next exponent that I need to take care of is this -2 squared, so -2 times -2. 2 times 2 is 4, signs are the same, the answer is positive, so I have a positive 4. I'm going to bring down the things that I haven't used. And so this bottom row now is where we take care of all of our multiply and divide. And I only see one multiplication problem, no division. And so here is my multiplication problem. -4 times a -3, right? The sign in front of it goes with it. And so the signs are the same, the answer is positive, and 4 times 3 is 12. Bring down the 25 that I haven't used. And I end up with 25 plus 12. Signs are the same. They're both positive whole numbers, and so I add them together and keep the sign, so I have a positive 37 as my final answer. All right, to start this one out, I need to write my rules. And we have fractions, the thing that you did not want to see, I'm sure. First thing that we need to do is we need to work inside the parentheses. This guy's got nothing going on, right? Just separating the divide sign and the negative sign. So we just leave him alone. We wouldn't have started with him anyways because he's on the right side. We would have started on the left, but I'm just pointing out that we don't even need to work that one yet. He's not a part of the real parenthesis rule. This guy is though. Oops, almost erased it. This guy is. So I need to subtract these numbers. Before I do anything, remember when you add and subtract fractions, you need a common denominator. So I need to multiply my denominators together. So 6 times 3 gives me a new denominator of 18. And it's a subtraction problem. Multiplying the diagonal and get 3, multiplying the diagonal and get 12. My denominators match, so I'm going to subtract my top numbers, 12 minus 3. 12 minus 3 gives me 9 over the denominator that I had, which is 18. Okay, so this whole piece here became this 9 over 18, okay? 9 over 18 does simplify, so I'm going to go ahead and make this as simple as I can first, and I'm going to divide the top and bottom by 9 and get 1/2. So technically, that whole piece became a positive 1/2. I'm going to bring down the divide sign and my parentheses and that -3/8. Handwriting's bad, but I'm working through it. All right, parentheses are done. There are no exponents, and now I need to multiply and divide. Well, I don't see any multiplication problems, but I do see a division problem right here, okay? And so when I divide two fractions, I'm going to keep it, change it, and flip it. So my new problem is 1/2 times, and remember I'm giving this negative sign to the top number, and so I'm going to have 8 over a -3 because I flipped it over. Okay. I'm going to simplify in the diagonal by dividing by 2 here and here, and I end up with 4 and 1. When I bring, oops, good grief. When I bring these over, I'm going to have 1 times 4 over 1 times negative 3, which becomes 4 over negative 3. When I simplify this, right, 1 negative, 1 positive, that's actually going to end up being a negative. Did I do this right? Let me think. Oh, I messed up right here. No one stopped me. I was thinking, that doesn't sound right. 2, is that right? 3/8, 1/2. Keep it, change it, flip it. 9 over 18, 2. Okay, just making sure. This is 4. Yes, it was right. This is 4, and so this is 4. And so when we simplify this, it becomes a negative 4/3. Final answer. All right, so this one looks a little more extensive. It's got something happening in the numerator and something happening in the denominator. What we're going to do is we're going to treat this like 2 separate problems. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take this negative 5 plus 3 squared, and I'm going to take care of it over here, and then I'm going to put my answer back on top, okay? So first thing that I'm going to do is exponents, because there's no parentheses. So I have 3 times 3, which is 9, right? Because 3 squared is 9. Bring down what I haven't used. Signs are different. Subtract, and take the sign of the bigger number. And so this became what? A positive 4. Now I'm going to take care of the denominator. 16, minus 7 times 2. So parentheses is just 2, so there's not really anything to do there. So I have no exponents, so now I move on to multiplication. So multiply and divide from left to right. The only multiplication I see is a negative 7 times 2. I multiply, 7 times 2 is 14. Signs are different, the answer is negative. Bring down the 16 that I haven't used. Going to change this to addition, change the sign of the guy that follows, and I have 16 plus a negative 14. I subtract and take the sign of the bigger number, and so this becomes a positive 2. And then this problem, this fraction here, is 4 divided by 2, which is a final answer of 2. One more. Same thing, we're going to treat this as 2 separate problems. So I'm going to take the numerator, negative 8 plus 5 times 4 minus 6 parentheses. All right, inside parentheses happens first, so we're going to change this to addition and change the sign of the guy that follows. So I have 4 plus a negative 6. Signs are different. Subtract and take the sign of the bigger number and end up with negative 2. I'm going to put it in parentheses because there is no symbol between these two. It means that the 5 is multiplied times it. All right, we're done with parentheses. There are no exponents. I need to multiply, which is this guy here. And signs are different. The answer is negative. 5 times 2 is 10. And I bring down the negative 8 that I haven't used yet. That's about 8. Going to change this to addition and change the guy that follows. And so this problem becomes negative 8 plus a negative 10. Signs are the same. Add and keep the sign. And so negative 18 is my numerator answer. So now I need to take care of my denominator. Negative 4 minus 4 squared divided by 8. So there's no parentheses. The next thing I do is exponents. Notice that this is not in parentheses right here. So this is not negative 4 squared, but just 4 squared. So I'm going to leave that, negative sign there, and I'm going to take care of this, which is 4 times 4, which is 16. And then I'm going to bring down this negative sign and this 4 and the divide by 8. So those are things I have not used. So there are no parentheses. The exponents are taken care of. Now we're multiplying and dividing from left to right, and I find this. So a negative 16 divided by 8. Well, the signs are different, so the answer is negative. And 16 divided by 8 is 2. Bring down the 4 that I haven't used. This is a subtraction sign that needs to be changed to addition. So I have 4 plus a negative 2. Signs are different. Subtract and take the sign of the bigger number. And so a positive 2 is my denominator. So up here I have a negative 18 divided by 2, right? This is a division problem. Signs are different. The answer is negative. 18 divided by 2 is 9, so negative 9 is my final answer.